today's about literature review. You cannot outsource this. Seriously, you cannot. All right? So there's 6 steps I'm going to take you through today. But what do I mean by 6 steps? Well, these are steps that I went through myself over the last probably 18 months on a real research paper that we haven't even submitted yet. And my co-author emails me just about every month. When are we going to submit? I said, it's not ready. When are we going to submit? It's not ready. More work needs to be done. And because I keep on getting rejections on other papers, I'm getting reviewer comments, I'm using those reviewer comments to make this paper better. So just because a paper hasn't been through the review process, it doesn't mean you cannot make it better, because you can interpret feedback from other papers into the current paper. And this is what I'm trying to tell my co-author. Yes, I've got other papers under review. Reviewers are criticising this, this and this. We need to fix these areas on this paper. So even though we haven't submitted, the paper is getting better. Okay. I'm trying to convince my co-author of that. So basic research question. I'm going to talk very briefly about 4 steps I went through in making the literature even stronger and stronger and stronger. Actually, the perfect literature review is one in which you have a table, and you'll see there's some tables in the handout today, where the reviewers see the table and they get it. And you'll find there's about 3 or 4 tables there that are not ready. You look at the first one. Let's have a look at the first one, shall we? And here's the model that we're working on. Here is the model. So we have independent variable. Okay, here's our dependent variable over here, and let's not worry about moderating factors for a moment, but the basic area or the domain of this case that we're taking you through today is how multinationals around the world, you can call it, even companies like Apple and Samsung and HTC, these brand name companies manage their suppliers, electronic component suppliers in China. Now, some of them, like Apple, are in the USA. Some of them, like HTC, are in Taiwan. Okay? And so there's a difference. So Apple is geographically more distant than HTC from the suppliers in China. Apple, being American, is more culturally distant from its Chinese suppliers than HTC, being Taiwanese. You get it? Well, that's the independent variable. Okay? And dependent variable is, well, how much control are they having over the suppliers? And so we're not talking about a contractual control, we're talking about on-the-ground monitoring type control. All right? So today's talk is not about, okay, what's the theory and all of that. I just want to introduce the variables to you, so when we go to the literature, to show you how confusing this whole area can be. And maybe this is a domain of management, marketing, international business, where the literature is very, very confused because there's so many sub-dimensions of that literature. There's international business, then there's a supply chain area in that, then there's domestic subsidiary operations in that area. There's all these little sub-domains, and they all have their different terminology. So let's get into it, shall we? Here's our first pass of the literature. This is over 18 months ago. So what we were doing here was, okay, let's pull out all the international business literature and find out which studies have focused on a particular type of dependent variable, like an objective function, okay? Whether it's choice of high control or formal control, use of informal control, use of formal control in interfirm partnerships, formal, informal, the basic distinction is one is more contractual, one is much more relational, okay? Enough of that. The demonstration here is to show you, okay, here's a basic literature review, all right? So we have all the papers here, and we have the dates, and then we just tick off. And so immediately we say, wow, very few studies have looked in these 2 domains. Ah, okay, is there any more? So there's more again. Oh, very few studies have looked at this domain here. Most of them are focusing on choice of low control entry mode. They're focused on joint ventures, you see. So you see a pattern, right? But that's the first pass. That's a very international businessy type, very broad, generic approach to the literature. The domain of my study is not there yet, okay? When I first started looking at this area, I thought, oh, this is where we are. That was 2 years ago. Where I am today is far from that. None of these papers are referred to in the latest working paper. But you've got to start somewhere. You've got to start somewhere, all right? So get out there and just, all right? So that's the first pass. So now we want to refine the scope of the literature from international business to global supply chain, because my data is, I went and spoke to over 1,000 suppliers in China, and then I asked them, those who have an international customer as their major customer, how are they monitoring you? How are they controlling you other than the contract? Okay, and are they frequent visits? Are they evaluating you on TDQSC, which is technology, delivery, service, cost and quality dimensions of performance measurement? You know, there's all this sort of thing going on, okay? And so this is a supply chain. This is not international business. So now we need to go from international business to supply chain. All right, can we do that? Well, we can get some help from a paper by Hanley and Benton, Journal of Operations Management 2013. I refer you to that as a case you may want to look up yourself. They did a wonderful literature review to show to the reviewers, here is all the literature, and here's our paper at the top, and we are addressing this column, this column, this column, this column. And if you have a look at all these papers, there's no paper that we have referred to that address all these 4 columns. And so the reviewers can get it immediately. Ah, that's what you're doing compared to the literature. You show the reviewer, you don't talk to the reviewer. Okay, showing can have a much greater impact. I get so many reviewer rejections where the reviewers will say, you really haven't demonstrated contribution to the literature, or it's not very clear, what are you talking about here? It doesn't seem to fit with the literature you're talking about. Because I'm trying to talk to the reviewer in English. English is a very inefficient language. Show and tell. Okay, this is a great paper. Check that out. I recommend all PhD students have a look at that. Even though it's operations management, your finance, accounting is still relevant to you, because on page 3 they have 2 whole pages of a literature review table, and they show in the second page they demonstrate where their paper fits in that table compared to all the other papers, and that's where we're heading today. All right, I'm not there yet. That's the model in the paper. Today's talk is not to give you a review of this paper. I want to give you tangible things that you can take away and refer to. Okay, so now we go to the supply chain, and now we refine the model to, well, maybe we want to look at inter-organisational governance mechanisms, formal controls, informal controls, because there's a literature out there that says, well, when we're managing companies in China, it's a developing economy, there's Guangxi, there's a different way of contracting, so we cannot just control everything in China with just pure contracts. The legal institutions are not so strong, blah, blah, blah. You can make up whatever theoretical argument you want, and there are tons of different theories out there explaining the need for a balance of formal and informal controls. Okay, so is that the correct way to note that? Maybe not. We need to go to the literature to find out what nomenclature the literature is using. Okay, when I put this up here, I'm not saying that this is my final understanding. Okay, 12 months ago that was my final understanding, but that is not my understanding today. All right, so today I'm presenting you processes that I've gone through on this paper. So I'm looking at here, here and here, and these studies have looked at here, 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 right? So I'm starting to categorise where other studies are in my categorisation of governance construct, the formal, relational, and other. Wow. All right, so we keep going, and notice as we go down, very few studies have measured formal controls. Oh, but there's one down the bottom. No. There's always one. Never ever say, oh, no study has looked at this variable, because I bet your bottom dollar a reviewer will find a study. All right? Never ever say that. You say to the best of our knowledge, all right, no study, okay? Never challenge reviewers with a statement like that. Okay, I'm doing this because no study has done this ever before. A reviewer finds one study, you're out. All right? That's what happens. Don't challenge reviewers. Okay, next. We have, so no studies have studied formal controls. Yes, they have. look, Children several, behaviour control down here. And now we have Griffith Lee et al., adaptation of detailed contracting, and then we have monitoring here, okay? But not many, you see. Most of the studies have focused in this area over here. So you see how we've gone over those 4 steps, those 4 iterations. We've gone from a lot of text to a lot of categorising. And so then the categories, if the reviewers agree with how you categorise based how you defined it and made it very clear, then they can't argue with whether you have put a tick or a cross in those categories. Okay? And so what you present to the reviewer is a table of patterns rather than a table full of text. You with me? So that's how you make your literature review stronger and stand alone. It speaks for itself, okay? So we're not done yet, but this is close to nearly final now, our final literature review. And so now we're not done. As I've said, okay, so what do we learn from that? Well, not many studies. I don't say no study has looked at formal controls, but most have focused on this informal control area. Okay? Most. All right, so what do we do now? Well, let's dig into the literature in this area. Let's dig deeper here. What do we mean by formal control? So, where am I going on this? Well, we're motivating that, well, not many studies have looked at this area. We need to measure both. But now if I'm going to go down this road of formal controls, I need to be very, very clear of what do I mean by this? Because sometimes maybe what you define formal controls to be, maybe that's the reason why you are crossing off other literatures. But a reviewer may disagree with that, so you need to be very careful before you cross off. So in the next iteration, before we go to the next iteration, let's just summarise the literature review of that last pass. So first we identify 5 studies which have examined both culture, geographical distance, blah, 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 and those 5 studies, only this study, find that CD and GD is significantly positively related to client extra costs. And so then this study finds this and this and this and this. So now we are translating what we find, the patterns in the table, into the first paragraph. Then we have a second paragraph. Most studies have examined the informal dimension of governance mechanisms. That's what I have iterated to you, right? So that's the second paragraph. And then I'm given some examples of studies that have looked at that. So in other words, I'm actually speaking to the table. Okay? Third, remember that institutional thing? Remember that? Remember in the original reviews, we had detail where the data came from, which country and all of that, but we transferred that into whether it came from a developing economy or a developed economy. So now we can make a third paragraph. The institutional setting of the supplier or service provider has not been systematically accounted for. For example, and then I start to talk about those studies. Wow. And then fourth, most studies have found support for location complexity hypothesis have focused on the service sector. If you go back in that literature review, and I've posted all of it into that study, you will find that most of them have looked at service sector. I cannot say that none have looked at manufacturing sector. There's a few, but never say none, because a reviewer will find one. Okay? Just say most. Okay? And then you may say why that's important. Okay? In the spirit of transaction cost theory is to consider factors that make something more expensive to outsource. While both services and supply chain manufacturing have high upfront fixed costs such as selection, training, the similarity ends there. So I'm making a case here that's important to distinguish between studies that have found these relationships between the independent variable and dependent variable in the service sector from the manufacturing sector. Okay? I need to make a case for that. So there's the 4 paragraphs. That's the literature review as it stands at the moment. Of course, that can be improved. So, and then summarising if you've got word space in your article, summarise again. Okay? So, when you send it out for review, what do you think the reviewers are going to do? Are they going to read those 4 paragraphs or are they going to go to the table? What do you think? They're going to go to the table. First of all, they're going to look for where their article is. All right? All right? And then they're going to look for, is there any article missing? Okay? Because they want a gotcha moment. All right? So you've got to minimise any gotcha moments. Minimise. You've got to be very, very thorough. That's why the next section is even more critical. Okay? We're going to another level of thoroughness. Okay? This is just a starting point, just to motivate why we should look at the manufacturing sector, why we should look at formal and informal. But now we need to go even deeper. What do you mean by formal? Okay? We need to break that apart. If it's so important, if it's never been studied so detailed before in international literature, maybe there's a reason that that management of service providers overseas or management of suppliers at a distance, formal doesn't matter. You cannot say it hasn't been studied, so you need to study it. Maybe it doesn't matter. That's why it hasn't been studied. So that's why we need to go. We need to go deeper on that gap and leave no stone unturned. So let's go to the next stage, shall we? So this is where we get into the importance of nomenclature. Nomenclature is the general language of a specific field of knowledge or subfield or sub-subfield. Okay? So the nomenclature in supply chain management is different from international business. Okay? Nomenclature in accounting, some of it can be different from finance and different from economics. All right? So you need to be very, very clear what words you are using. Let me explain to you. Okay, so just remind you again, there's the gap that we're trying to fill. Okay, you understand that? All right, so just go with me here. Remember, I'm not presenting a paper and trying to defend everything to you. All right, my job today is just to show you how, with a set of tables, we are trying to improve the efficiency with how we get a message across to reviewers that here is the state of the literature and here is how what we are focusing on compares to the state of the literature. That's all we're trying to do today. Okay? I'm not saying that my theories are good or bad or anything like that. That's another session. All right? So it's all about convincing the reviewers, make it very, very clear what you are studying and how that fits in with the literature, the body of knowledge. And I've had rejections from reviewers that speak to that exact thing. So I'm talking to you from experience today, not from this is what you should do. This is what has caused me pain in the past, okay? I'm sharing my pain with you today, all right? Pain is always best to speak on. Okay, how many of you make notes as you are studying? We're going to bring another dimension in here. How many of you make notes? So where are your notes? Where's your notebook? Is that your notebook? Is that it? And have you filled it up? Empty. What's going on? All right? All right, here's my notes for the past 18 months. Okay? All right? I'm not doing a PhD, but I still take notes. Okay? May 2016. Okay? Now this year, March 2018, August 2018, I'm halfway through. It's nearly, look at that, okay? So what I'm going to show you now in some of the PowerPoint slides is examples of how I make notes to make it even more efficient for you to memorise, or not memorise in such of to go on a quiz show or a game show, but to memorise from a point of view of you having the knowledge, you having the command over the literature. That when you walk into the room, that you know more about the literature than your supervisor. Students, how many of you believe that you will know more than your supervisor at the end of your PhD? Put your hand up. How many? Do you believe this? At the end? You should. At a minimum, you need to know more. Your supervisor cannot hope to know as much as what you are doing. The supervisor has to teach. The supervisor has to publish 4 or 5 other papers during your PhD time. Okay? You're focusing. You're focusing on a clear subject, a clear contribution. You need to know all of the literature. And you can have command of that. You need to demand it of yourself, because I don't think supervisors are demanding of their PhD students. You have to set the standard yourself, higher than what your supervisor is asking of you. And maybe your supervisor is good at data, but you have to set your own standard when it comes to the literature. Are you with me here? Just because your supervisor may not know all the literature doesn't mean that's the level of your knowledge. You need to rise above that. Okay? You need to be the most expert in this school at the end of your PhD, of your clear topic you're focusing on. Demand it of yourself. All right? Don't expect to demand it of your supervisor. All right? Hey, I'm motivation talk 2 today, all right? All right? You've got to demand that. You've got to set your own standard. You've got to set higher than your supervisor. All right, so how does this, right, fit in with what we're doing? I won't share all this because there's some personal stuff in here. All right, but this one here we can pass around. You can, that one there. Let me just check. Yeah, that one there we can pass around. Okay. All right. I think that's enough. That's enough for now. All right. All right, so what are we doing here? I want to understand monitoring. I want to be the world's expert of what does the whole academic literature know about monitoring. Once I'm the expert, then I have crystal clear about what I want to write or what terminology I want to use in that dependent variable. Okay? If that's a formal control, then I need to know all about that. So let's have a look. So we go into some Strategic Management Journal. What I highlight that because the nomenclature of strategy may be different from international business, different from supply chain management. So just be careful here. All right. So, you know, a very famous paper, Laura Popo's done a lot of work in this area with Kevin Zhao, Hong Kong U. So there were formal contracts. So, okay, great. Formal contracts, very broad. What does that mean? Don't read what the authors say they think it means. Go to the measurement the authors have used. Now, some of you are using secondary data. This may not directly apply, okay, especially accounting and finance economics, but if you're in management, strategy, marketing, this is critical, 10 times critical. And so there's the measure there. And so then I go to another paper, Zhao, Popo and Young, and then they use customised contracts, and they're using the same measure, but then they call it different. Now maybe customised contract fits in with JIBS. You see that? Different journal, different nomenclature, same measure. Okay, you need to be clear about that. Okay, let's go further. Zhao and Popo, JIBS, similar measure, now they call it explicit contracts. Another journal, Zhao and Zhu, they call the same thing detailed contracts. No wonder why people get bored with academics. They're always making up terms. This is a joke. Same journal, and they allow the same things to be called, right? But you, as a PhD student, it's not about you changing the published world. It's about you knowing these holes. Let me repeat. Your job as a student is not about changing the published world and criticising this, and this is your hobby, soapbox that, oh, they shouldn't have published that one and this one and all that. No, you just be aware of that, okay, and understand that, well, just because it's published doesn't mean it is correct, okay? Just be aware of that. Huh? All right, so let's keep going. So then that's the same paper again. I just read. So, okay, so those 4 papers, the Zhao papers, the Popo papers, I think, much more surface level, just looking at really this, how do we control Chinese businesses? Do we use formal, do we use informal? Contracts, whether we call them explicit, customised, detailed, it all means the same thing to them, all right? But don't make that mistake as a PhD student, all right? All right? But now I want to go, what does formal mean in the supply chain literature? Well, let's have a look. And so now we look at the work of Lawson and Cousins. Cousins done a lot of work with Handfield and Lawson. Now they start to say formal socialisation, informal socialisation. Wow, that's different from contracts. It's different from relational governance. You've got a different term. What do they mean by that? Well, then I cut and paste the actual measure they use, and I say, their formal socialisation, that means monitoring to me. What else? Cousins and Lawsons. Now they look at these measures here, and so we're talking about communication measures and performance measures. There's performance measurement. That's formal to me, how they measured that. Look, I printed out the paper and I cut out the actual measure they used and put it here because I want to know. And then I coloured it green. Anything green means formal measure to me. See, notice there's no green here because this is more informal monitoring, but I see this as formal performance measurement here. Wow. Okay, so we keep going, and now we have that's the same again. All right, let's just keep moving. The Popo and Zhao, and then we've got a summary of the Zhao framework, and then I started to summarise and started thinking about this. Now, let's keep moving. Now we go to the Cousins work, Cousins, Handfield, Lawson. Again, supply chain literature again. And they looked at formal socialisation mechanisms and informal, okay? So I need to be, what do they mean by socialisation? Well, that's what they describe it, all right? Don't always believe that. What did they measure? So I cut out and pasted, how did they measure it? I need to know what measures they're using. So the Popo and Zhao literature focus more on governance, and there's 3 comments there about that. Then the Cousins literature, they focus more on integration. They talk about socialisation mechanisms, formal socialisation mechanisms, communication focus measures. Different terminology, different measures. So let's keep moving. Now we want to even go one step further. Okay, so we're digging deeper, deeper and deeper, so we know everything about a particular measure that's going to be an independent variable of the paper. And so, remember, we're focusing on, remember I had formal and informal? Now I'm splitting that up into output and behaviour controls. I've now split formal into output and behaviour. I've gone even deeper. Now, if I'm going to do that, what does the literature say about output and behaviour? Well, O'Donnell, SMJ, early SMJ, they looked at some of that, and so they talk about monitoring here. How did they measure it? No green there, so there's no output controls here. Green, they measured monitoring and performance measurement, and so there's that measurement again. See how that? I noted that green. All right, these are all papers now, and so we keep moving along. Cosmo, 2018 paper. They start talking about this formal output controls here, and they talk about it, but they don't measure it. So I put that in green. So I want to know. And then these are the Christian names, this is Hernandez et al. Here. And they looked at output control and behaviour control. So how did they measure it? So I want to be very clear here. You with me here? All right? So notice how I'm drilling down. Now, I didn't have time to put this in the table, but notice I just said, enough is enough, okay? All those papers I just reviewed then, let's put in 3 columns. One is this is more relational, informal here. This is your 2 columns of formal, but this is your really output type column here, and there's your behaviour type column here. And so notice the green for all the formal output controls here. And now I can say, Cousins and Lawson, Cousins, Handfield, they looked at measures, but they call it supply-based alignment. Whereas Cosmo et al., they looked at behaviour and output, they call it monitoring. Then Hernandez, behaviour and output as dimensions of monitoring. But then if you go down to Krauss, they talk about buying firm strategy, and they looked at direct involvement, supplier alignment, and supplier assessment. So Krauss, they talk about output controls as supplier assessment, supplier evaluation, and output. Wow. One last depth. Okay, literature review, this is the general international supply chain literature, but this is more the domestic literature on management. So we're going even one step deeper to some of the core articles of the work of Worth and Hyde, and the work of Hyde has, like Jan Hyde, very big publisher in this area, citations over 10,000, very big area, all right? But he doesn't work in supply chain management, but I want to know, what did they write about? And so I had to go to their papers. So there's the Krauss paper, another Krauss paper, there's the Hyde paper, they talk about monitoring here, and then the final Hyde, and then they monitoring, they split it into behaviour and output. And so I get some sense now of what my dependent variable needs to be about. So we've gone very broad to very, very narrow. And I think the last 10 minutes was not much about creating more categories in the table of literature review. It's all about working out, okay, so when authors talk about different terms, do they mean the same thing? And what you find is, yes, they do mean the same thing. Here's the same general construct here. Some of them say monitoring, some say formal socialisation, some say behaviour, okay? In this one here, some say measurement, some say supplier assessment, some say supplier evaluation. Just need to be very clear, okay? So you as a PhD, when you're presenting, okay, if you know all this, no one can criticise you for not knowing the literature. No one can criticise you for not knowing where your contribution fits into the literature. All right? That's half your battle when you're presenting. Half your battle when you're presenting is you convincing a panel that you know the literature that you're contributing to. Half the battle is you removing any gotcha moments. When the panel says, you missed this article, you missed this. Okay? How do you remove that? You've got to know the literature. You've got to just read and read and read. And I'm just saying that this is a memory device. I can tell you, yes, you can digitalise everything, but once you start writing yourself, you memorise this much easier. Much easier than you try to put everything into a computer. Yes, I know I've had PhD students in Hong Kong where they put the 200 articles in the capital markets literature and Sarbanes-Oxley in an Excel spreadsheet, but you know, it's there today and gone in 3 years' time, you just forget. Okay? But when it's in here, it's always. Yesterday, I was doing some writing on this paper and I remembered, I was talking about something in November 2016 because I presented at the University of Melbourne, and I remembered, yes, I wrote about it in this book. I looked it up, supplier reliability, and there it is there, reliability, the reliability literature there. Look, supplier reliability, see that? All right, okay, how can you remember that 2 years later? How can you remember a concept 2 years later? All right? This is just as important. This is your second memory device, not this. Okay? All right? All right? This is just a plaything, okay? But this is your ticket to commanding your knowledge of the literature, okay? All right? And there's my summary of that second round. There's my summary, one paragraph summary of this. Okay. Now I didn't have time to put it into a nice table. I don't think I want to do that. I think the reviewers will go crazy if I do that again. All right. But I just need to have clarity. If I'm going to write a paragraph about what do I mean by governance mechanisms by reference to, and now you notice, let me read out one sentence. Okay. Behaviour controls refer to the process of monitoring the behaviour of the supplier. Okay, so that is a definitive statement. This is what I am defining behaviour controls to be. But look at this. Authors have referred to this construct as formal socialisation, internal coordination, the monitoring, and behaviour monitoring. 4 different, right? See, I'm acknowledging what the literature is calling the term that I am using. All right? So it's not that you are ignoring the literature, you are acknowledging the literature. And that's partly important for a literature review. All right? And so at the end, you know, we're trying to focus on the input-output controls and behaviour controls. And that's, at the end of the day, we want to make a contribution. But the big message of today is, how do you efficiently communicate to reviewers, okay, the exact contribution you're making to the literature? You cannot even start to do that if you don't know everything about the literature, okay? And never give reviewers a gotcha moment. That is, you forgot this paper, or this is the wrong term you should be using, okay? Instead, maybe you want to use the term you want to use, but you defend it. You defend it just like I do here. I want to call my term behaviour controls, but I'm acknowledging that the literature has called it formal socialisation, internal coordination. You see that, all right? So you just be aware of that. And you know, so far this is our final review, where we were making very, very clear we're focusing on formal controls. It hasn't been done, but we want to go deeper into why it hasn't been done and explain and so forth. So that's it. That's why literature review sounds very boring. It sounds like a master's level task that you have to do, like a pre-entry into a PhD. And then when you get into a PhD, well, then you've got to do all the fancy stuff. No, this is the bread and butter of your PhD. I'm amazed when I see academics that when they present, they just know all the literature. Sometimes that is more amazing than what they are talking about. And the great thing about those type of academics is you can ask them lots of questions. Because you don't only have to ask questions about what they're doing, you probably disagree with what they're doing, but you're curious about, so you know all about this literature. I know what you've done, so where do you think we go next? And that person is more likely to be able to answer that question because they know the literature, not because of their little study that they have done themselves. Critical. What I say in the advert for this coffee and cookie, most underrated area, literature review. Do you really think that still? All right. Think about that. But work on your memory. Work on your memory. Does it really cost that much to have a little book like this? Like, this is too big. You'll never carry it around. All right? I go out for dinner with my wife. I got this with me still. All right? Because it fits into my little bag. I can carry this anywhere.
What happens if you lose them?
You just got to hang on to it. It's just like a smartphone. It's more valuable. You take photos of it, like what I did.
Smartphone I can replace.
Yes. Well, then you take PDF copies of it. All right? All right. Right. PhD students, if you do not change what you're doing, how you're doing today after today, then you'll just continue on the path that you were going before today. All right? So you make that choice. You have to make that choice, not your supervisor. Okay? And as I said earlier, you should expect yourself to know more than your supervisor in your area when you're done. All right? That's a standard for yourself. A supervisor shouldn't hold you to that standard. You should hold that for yourself, okay? So there we go. Any questions? Yes?
So when you are looking at this model, when you do your literature search and all, it's looking at one specific construct with another construct. But let's say, when do we look into task-specific complexity and the relationship with of that variable with another construct? That means the whole thing, this whole process has to be repeated for every single.
Okay, this can be very big. Okay, but no, it depends on what is your secondary independent variable and your primary independent variable. Okay, so if you look at the Hanley and Benton paper, which a lot of this is guided from, their primary independent variable is really focusing on controlling outsourced service providers at a distance. Okay, and secondary to that is this area here. So what Hanley and Benton did, if you look in their literature review, and you've got that paper to follow up on, they did both. But what they did, they had a title, and to stop the gotcha moment, they said the representative literature of this area. In other words, they didn't say this is the complete literature, all right? To your point, you may have 200 articles there. You cannot put that in, all right? So you have a representative literature. The main area is just to demonstrate where the big gaps are, okay? All right? And so Hanley and Benton did that. What I'm doing is just, okay, when I go into Google Scholar, I focused on culture distance and geographical distance and control as key terms. I didn't even look at this because Hanley and Benton have already done that. They've already done that in their literature review. Okay, so you don't want to repeat total literature reviews, but you want to be a little bit more nuanced and just focus. Otherwise, you're going to have 200 articles in literature review.
It's like in my model, I look at the relationship between the independent and the dependent. So that's how I Google search the relationship and then a list of articles. But I have like mediators and moderators. So how do I do a search or literature on how those constructs play a role as a mediator?
You've got to keep searching and searching. Like in that literature review, and you'll see that the totality of it is in there, the final one. You'll see, I think there's less than 30 papers. But I can tell you, I've gone through over 100. Okay, and there was one part where I had a flight to Hong Kong the next day, and I thought I'll read on the aeroplane, and so there was about 40 papers I had to read. So I printed it out at 4 pages per A4 sheet. Okay, can you read that? So I'm on the plane, and it's very small print because I was just scanning. I was scanning. No, this is not right. Next one. No. And whole papers, and there was I had 2 blocks of 70 pages, and I went through that on my 4-hour flight to Hong Kong, scanning through, and then I said to my co-author, we need this one, and I pulled out about a dozen papers from those. Yeah, okay, so Google Scholar will take you some of the way, but at the end of the day you're going to have to print out some and scan through. And the great thing is you put since 2016 or since 2017 or 2018, and it's likely you'll get a literature review in your area. And you need to look at that. And then you print out all of those papers. Sounds environmentally unfriendly, scrub that. All right? That's a start, right? And you need to go through all them. That's how I got that block of papers, 140 pages of 4 pages each, back to back, all right? So there's about 800 pages there skimming through. Remember, an article is 25, 30 pages, about 20 pages in a published version, all right? So you see what I mean there. All right, there's 40 articles there. All right, so you go through that, you need to skim through and find out for yourself because Scholar won't tell you everything. But what you can do is you inverted commas in Scholar and you go for key terms that are used. So culture distance as a key term, okay? Geographical distance, key term, psychic distance, Okay, yeah. You just got to keep digging and digging and digging. And as a PhD student, you have time to do that. And you need to spend, this may take months of time you're doing. But making notes, this makes it so much easier. And sometimes, one day, where's this one here? No, I used to make notes where I just, I'm drawing, right? I'm just drawing pictures, right? Then I lose motivation one day. Oh, cutting and pasting is faster. All right? All right? No, you got to improvise. All right? You don't wake up every day with the same level of motivation, do you? Tell me you're not unlike me. You're the same as me. Every day is different. Every day's hard. All right? So, but this gets you into the mind, all right? What I did is I didn't cut and paste everything. I cut and pasted key measures because I was focusing. I want clarity, clarity, clarity on the measurement aspect of what I'm focusing on. I just want to make sure I leave no stone unturned on the measurement aspect. So, cut and paste, how they describe it, and then I colour it. Is that what I'm focusing on? Boom, done. Okay, next one. I haven't even read the paper, just cut and paste. Then I get to a stage, I carry this around with me. And so I go down to the Mad Alchemy, I get a coffee one day, and then I flick through it, and then I can start to summarise when you feel like it. You with me? Your mind is not always in this consuming and memorising mode. You cannot, but you've got to improvise when it's not. Are you with me? And then get this ready for when the mind is ready, and then the mind can go faster. You with me? So you can always be doing something even if you're not in the mood. That's what, all right? So this is why this is really critical. I love your question. Any more questions?
Can you just go back to the model?
Yes.
The model, there's no model.
I was waiting for a tricky question for you.
No, when you talk about controlling mechanisms, right, formal, informal, where will you bring the theory in? I mean, your contribution to the literature.
Okay,
Agreed.
Yeah, your question.
All these gaps, this paper.
Yes. Okay. So there's a general theory about how these type of formal controls can be effectively implemented at a distance, whereas these type of controls are more resource intensive.
So you use resource-based theory,
transaction cost theory, resource-based theory.
Transaction cost.
Yeah, but and so when we separate, now suddenly the theory becomes finer, right? We're making a distinction. Generally, the theory says we should use more formal when we have risk that we need to manage. But one type of control is resource intensive more than the other. So we should expect a stronger relationship here under some circumstances and a stronger relationship here under other by making that separation. All right? Yeah, it's a good question.
If I want to take this further into a qualitative study, right?
Yes.
I can get deeper insights if I do a case study, am I right?
Yes, you can. Yes. So you should do what I did from 2010 to 2012, and we went and interviewed 1,000 suppliers. So that's the type of qualitative study I like. When you interview 1,000, not just one. All right? And you really get insights on what's going on. All right? Where these measures came from. The data I collected for this study was taken by direct face-to-face interviews with the suppliers, yeah. But you're right, go into the case study. But what you need to go with, when you go into the case study, you're going with a broader ammunition, a broader set of questions, because you don't want the case answer just to be focused on these areas, because there's maybe something that is outside of what you're focusing on, right? And what I would do is say, I wouldn't even go in and ask questions about these at the start of the interview. You asked me about how would you approach this as a case study. I would go in as an open-ended and start talking about, okay, so what is your biggest challenge and how you're responding to it, and what keeps you awake at night? Very general questions to think about, and even before you get down to what mechanisms or what controls are on that organisation. Just really get to know with, how's that organisation working? I just published a paper recently based on 2 questions. What is your biggest challenge and how are you responding to that challenge? You can do that. Yeah, so this is very, very narrow for a case study. Yeah, but good question. Yeah, more questions?
I think you are in the wrong department. Definitely you are in the wrong department. I just cannot understand what you're doing in the department of accounting.
We're all in wrong departments.
You should be in the department of management.
It's all right. It's all right.
Where this is international, hardcore international business, man. It's my area.
But you're the expert.
I teach this in class. What is this?
But you're the expert, right? I'm just a novice. I'm your apprentice.
I try to convince Jane.
Okay. No, I like accounting. I like accounting. Thank you, sir. We need to have lunch. Yes.
Just one question. So I'm doing quality study, and in my field, it's a new field, and most of the research is quantitative, exploratory.
Right.
How do I look at organizing the literature just as you have done, or do I apply something different maybe?
Yeah, maybe, okay, that's a very good question for a longer discussion, and maybe we should have that discussion. But your general question is, you're doing it qualitative in the field, okay? Should you organise the literature first? You need to do a lot of reading of the literature. I would first go into Google Scholar and look for reviews in your area since 2015 or 16. You want to get very recent reviews so you can get an idea what is that scope that has looked at, that area you're looking at. And you're looking at leadership, management, there's a different aspect of management you're looking at. Marketing, my area is supply chain management. And since I focus on Chinese suppliers, it automatically lends itself to international business challenges. So, yeah. So you need to, there's so many different dimensions. Maybe we can have a longer chat on that one. That's a good question. But I think it's in the right area. Like, my first case study in this area was in 2009, and what I know now, I just knew nothing at that time. And so sometimes, maybe some of your first case studies are learning and you cannot even use. All right? You learn from some of the case studies to start with. Then you go back to literature, find out what does the literature have to say about what you learn before you do the real case study for your PhD. Okay? You do pilot work before you do the real case study. Okay. We can talk more. Happy to. If management allows me to talk to you. Permission. I'll fill out the forms for permission first. Yeah. Well, thank you all for coming, and pardon? We've got tea now, okay? So I hope this is beneficial for you. So PhD students, you go out and make this count, okay? I want to see you all walking around with a little book. All right?
Buying them tonight.
Yes.